Even though he was only 35 years old, David Adams was a person of rigid principles. He was the proud owner of a string of gas stations dispersed across the northern state. These gas stations constituted a reliable and substantial source of income for David. Everything seemed perfect except for a persistent problem at one particular station. David was perplexed by the issue plaguing this specific location. He made it a point to pay the staff well and on time, and was lenient with days off as per their requirements. But for some inexplicable reason, this gas station was subjected to harsh reviews and was a frequent target for shoplifters. Shoplifters weren't stealing fuel, of course, but merchandise from the store. David tried reviewing the security footage, but the theft was either extremely subtle or the problem lied elsewhere. Furthermore, it was challenging to determine if the employees were involved, as there was no discernible suspicious behavior from the customers either. Although troubled, David was cautious about accusing his employees without concrete evidence. Despite the unpleasant circumstances, he strived to maintain his composure. One weekend, David and his old friend Tom Jenkins attended a basketball game. David was fond of blending business with pleasure, often combining formal meetings with leisurely activities. Tom was once David's business rival. Before David ventured into the gas business, he operated a tire store. He and Tom owned competing tire shops on opposing sides of the same road. Initially, they shared a strong friendship, but as more customers flocked to David's store, Tom initiated an aggressive campaign to outdo his competition. Their friendship swiftly morphed into rivalry, leading to a cessation of communication between them. However, at one point, David had an epiphany. He realized he was losing sight of his values in the heat of the competition. He didn't want to win at the expense of his former friend. In a stroke of ingenuity, he proposed a change in their marketing strategy. David decided to prioritize integrity and acknowledge that there was more than enough business to go around. He wanted to move away from negative comparisons with Tom's shop, focusing instead on their own merits. David's revamped marketing communication emphasized the products they offered to meet customers' needs and facilitate their journey into the future. They highlighted their excellent customer service offered at competitive prices. Above all, David understood that he and Tom could cater to distinct customer bases without undermining each other. David's business relationship with Tom blossomed into a steadfast friendship. In fact, it was Tom who first suggested that David enter the gas station business. After their basketball game, they visited a quiet cafe to discuss several issues. Among them, David confided in Tom about the puzzling shoplifting incidents at one of his gas stations. After giving it some thought, Tom proposed a simple solution. "Why don't you bring in employees from other branches?" Tom suggested. David was initially baffled. "What do you mean?" Tom clarified. "You have branches that are performing well, correct? And managers who are successfully running those stations, right?" "Okay," David replied, starting to understand. "You should bring them in because they know what to do, and they know how to run things efficiently. See if anything changes." "But won't that jeopardize the other branches if their effective managers leave?" David queried. Tom acknowledged his concerns but countered, "Yes, I understand your worry. However, I see two benefits here. First, you're attempting to resolve an existing issue, and second, you're offering another employee an opportunity to prove their managerial skills." Convinced by Tom's advice, David selected a few high-performing employees and a manager from his other branches and transferred them to the problematic station. While some declined the offer, the truly loyal ones agreed without hesitation. To David's astonishment, the issue at the troubled gas station was quickly resolved. Positive reviews began flooding in, and order was restored. The gas station started functioning efficiently, and profits were on the rise. Although shoplifting hadn't completely ceased, it had become considerably less frequent. However, a new problem soon arose. Among the transferred employees was a gas attendant named Harry. After working at the new station for a couple of months, he expressed a desire to return to his old branch or even quit. Two of his colleagues also chose to resign. Intrigued by the situation, David decided to personally investigate the matter. He drove to the gas station and invited Harry into the back office for a chat. "Why do you want to return to your old station? After all, I'm paying you more here," David asked. Harry waved his hand dismissively. "I appreciate the increased pay, sir, but no amount of money can compensate for the stress. I'm just exhausted from her constant criticism, whether it's about my attire, my customer service, or even the way I handle the pump. She never stops. If it was only work-related, I could bear it, but she started commenting on my personal life too. Just the other day, my wife stopped by, and I stepped away to speak to her. I was told to manage my family affairs after work hours. No, sir, I appreciate everything, but I simply can't work with these people. Please transfer me back or let me go. I'll find something else. David exhaled heavily. He understood where Harry was coming from. The problem seemed to lie with the manager. She was an efficient worker, thorough and meticulous, but her management style was apparently causing distress among the staff. However, Margaret was also a major source of workplace gossip and friction. While she excelled at her duties, she fell short in personal interactions and leadership qualities. David was at a loss regarding how to handle the situation. He planned to have a friendly chat with Margaret about it, though the idea itself made him grin cynically. Margaret was a woman of a certain age, known for her idiosyncratic personality. Harry, the gas attendant, left in a huff, even quitting his job at the station. Now, David had another issue to deal with. He needed to find a replacement, at least temporarily, until he could hire a long-term employee. Stepping outside, he noticed a young woman nearby. Her clothing was worn and her thin frame suggested she was struggling. It was clear that she was going through a rough patch. She stood near the gas station, lost in thought, showing no intent to drive or buy anything from the shop. Suddenly, an audacious idea popped into David's mind. He approached the young woman and asked, "Excuse me, do you need anything?" Startled, she looked up at him, then smiled. "I'm sorry, I was just wondering if there's any work around here." "Really? That's fantastic. What kind of work were you looking for?" "Anything, honestly. I learned quickly and am willing to take on any job." David considered her for a moment. "Do you have any papers?" Yes. It's just that lately I've had some issues and..." Anticipating that she may not have the papers, David interrupted her. "Come with me." He led the way back to the building, a sense of excitement in his steps. The young woman followed him to the office, where he asked her to wait at the door. He walked into Margaret's office, the eyes of the entire office following him. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Nelson." Margaret, in the midst of a tea break, choked a little on her drink and stood up. "Hello, Mr. Adams. I'm sorry about this. Please come in." Margaret was a full-figured woman. Having tried and failed multiple diets and exercise routines, she always seemed to gain more weight than she lost. For some reason, David had always associated plump people with kindness, but Margaret was an exception to his theory. The larger she got, the more irritable she seemed to become. Some speculated that her perpetual single status and dedication to her work were factors in her unhappiness. When asked why she never married, she simply responded that it was hard to find someone who could handle her. "Mrs. Nelson, the gas station's rumors aren't my concern. I'm here to address the fact that another gas jockey has quit." Margaret looked visibly taken aback. "Who knows what goes through their heads? Maybe they've breathed in too much petrol fumes," she suggested. David dismissed her flippant response. He knew she was instrumental to the station's operations, so firing her was not an option. "Mrs. Nelson, I'm not planning to dig deeper into this issue today, but I have a new recruit waiting outside. If she also quits within a month, I'll have to investigate further." "A girl? We need a sturdy bloke to pump gas, not a girl." David's voice grew stern. "I think you're overstepping your boundaries, Mrs. Nelson. It's my Cole who works here." Margaret bit her lip, not accustomed to being put in her place. In her mind, her hard work and dedication were the backbone of the station's success. If it weren't for her, David's business would have crumbled long ago. David was a wise leader, however. He allowed his employees room for autonomy. Although finding replacements wasn't difficult, he valued maintaining a harmonious workplace. The new recruit, Samantha, was a fast learner. She grasped her responsibilities within an hour and wasted no time in getting to work. Before David left, she had already tidied up the recycling bins around the station. Before driving off, David took Samantha aside. "Please write down my number and text me your clothing and shoe sizes. I'll arrange a uniform for you. And remember, If the manager gives you a hard time, don't hesitate to call me." Samantha smiled appreciatively. "Thanks a lot. I can handle it. I've dealt with tougher bosses." David eyed the new employee with surprise. Samantha seemed more capable than her appearance suggested. Over the following 3 weeks, David was swamped and couldn't visit the branch. He was concerned, but Margaret's brief and positive reports reassured him that everything was running smoothly. When he found a spare moment, he decided to drop by unannounced. He parked a short distance away, choosing to observe from his car before making his presence known. A car rolled into the gas station, and Samantha swiftly approached it. She looked transformed. The uniform fit her well, enhancing her figure. She no longer bore the worn-out look of a struggling individual. Samantha was all smiles, revealing bright white teeth. David exited his car and strolled towards her, coming up from behind. "Hello, Samantha." Startled, she spun around. Recognizing him, she straightened up and stepped forward. "Hello, Mr. Adams," she greeted cheerfully. "How's everything? Is Margaret treating you well?" He gave her a warm smile. "Absolutely. She's a delightful lady." David was taken aback. "Really? You find Mrs. Nelson delightful?" "Yes, she's quite nice." He regarded Samantha with a skeptical look, as though questioning her sanity. Holding his gaze on her, he slowly headed towards the office. Samantha, taken aback by his response, wondered if she had said something wrong. After he vanished behind the office door, she returned to her duties. Inside the office, Margaret was berating the operators. "What on earth are you two doing standing around while Samantha cleans the coffee machine?" Margaret pointed at a mass of spilled coffee. The operators hung their heads in guilt, having let a customer ask Samantha to clean up their mess. As one operator tried to speak up, Margaret silenced him, threatening, "If this happens again, you'll be the one cleaning up the entire area." Just then the operators noticed David, and Margaret spun around. Seeing David, her scowl transformed into a smile. "Mr. Adams, I was starting to think you'd forgotten us. It's good to see you." David was not only surprised but nearly lost his footing. He had never seen Margaret smile before. He also noticed she seemed a bit slimmer. "How are things, Mrs. Elson?" "Everything is wonderful, Mr. Adams. I can't express how grateful I am for Samantha." David sunk into a chair in her office, utterly confused. "I'm having trouble believing this. Is this really you, Mrs. Nelson?" Margaret broke into laughter and replied, "Indeed, it is me. Don't be alarmed, Mr. Adams. You see," she paused, gathering her thoughts before proceeding, "Samantha and I had a major argument on the first day. I was so livid I thought I'd fire her and quit myself. She came off as overly confident. But then, incredibly, we ended up chatting the whole night. Her life story is filled with hardship. I can't even put her experiences into words. She would do it more justice. Anyway, we've become great friends. She's sharp, and I dare say she could replace anyone here." "Even you?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. She's well educated." "Educated? What sort of education could she possibly have?" David was flabbergasted, but Margaret only grinned. "You'll find out soon enough." David could only shake his head. "Okay, that sounds promising then. Mrs. Nelson, I've brought the invitations for the company's New Year party. Please figure out who will need to stay on duty." "Sure. Thank you, Mr. Adams." David's company always held lavish corporate parties. He spared no expense, ensuring they were held at luxurious venues and included employee bonuses. This year was no different. As his company thrived, profits soared. Compared to other businesses grappling with staff issues, David's company was thriving, all because he prioritized employee satisfaction. "Mrs. Nelson, could I trouble you for a cup of coffee?" David requested while settling in her office. "Absolutely. I'll be right back." Moments later, a plate of cookies and a cup of coffee sat before David. He noticed Margaret had also poured a cup for herself, but didn't take any cookies. His eyebrows shot up in surprise, prompting laughter from Margaret. "Don't give me that look, Mr. Adams. Yes, I'm dieting again. Samantha suggested this new diet. I've never experienced anything quite like it, so I'm sticking to it. And don't even mention my old love for sweets." David left the gas station more bewildered than when he had arrived, particularly about Samantha. She was an enigma. When he hired her, he'd only intended for her to fill a gap temporarily until he could find a more reliable replacement. He'd assumed that once she got her first paycheck, she'd disappear, maybe to buy alcohol or drugs. Yet, observing Samantha dedicatedly fulfilling her duties caused David to reconsider his earlier assumptions. "Alright, whatever's going on, if things are going well, then that's excellent," he reassured himself. The ensuing months progressed with a hitch. Positive reviews for the gas station began to accumulate. Its customer service was even outshining that of other successful branches. A recent spree of shoplifting incidents abruptly ended as well. They eventually apprehended the culprit, a disgruntled ex-employee seeking revenge on manager Margaret. David hypothesized that Samantha's arrival had introduced a positive shift in the station's atmosphere, a change that had also influenced the former employee. Opting not to press charges, David discreetly rehired the ex-employee at another branch. One day, David received a roster of attendees for the upcoming corporate party. Noticing Samantha's name on the list gave him pause. A person barely scraping by like her likely doesn't even own a formal dress. "Well, that's not really my concern, I suppose," he pondered quietly. On the day of the party, guests started to arrive early. While David was acquainted with some, others were unfamiliar faces. Recognizing the women proved challenging. Accustomed to their usual uniforms, David found it hard to identify them, as they were all elegantly dressed for the festivities. The restaurant teetered on full capacity. David mingled with his familiar employees, engaging in light-hearted chit-chat as the formal ceremonies drew nearer. He found himself repeatedly looking over the main entrance. For some reason, he was anticipating Samantha's arrival. His curiosity twirled between wondering what attire she would wear and whether she would make an appearance at all. Briefly, he swiveled around to engage someone in conversation and was taken aback by a voice from behind. "Good evening, Mr. Adams." As he spun back around, he found himself at a loss for words, his surprise leaving him momentarily speechless. "Hello?" The woman standing before him was breathtaking. Her ethereal beauty seemed to transcend the realm of reality. Her hairstyle was sophisticated, her makeup flawless, and her dress exquisite. The dress seemed as though it cost a fortune. Amusingly, he found himself equating the cost to a fuel truck. "You don't recognize me?" In fact, he didn't. He was certain he didn't know this young woman. If he had met her before, she would have been unforgettable. His gaze drifted towards Margaret, who stood in his peripheral vision, grinning from ear to ear. She mouthed something and after a moment nodded towards David. Suddenly, it hit him. "Samantha? Is that really you? This can't be possible." The woman erupted into a fit of laughter. "Well, as you can see, anything is possible." David blinked in astonishment. He couldn't reconcile the radiant version of Samantha standing in front of him with the version he remembered. But how? I mean, how can you explain this transformation? You insisted you needed a job and would take anything. I assumed your life had been so fraught with difficulties, you'd never be able to bounce back. Samantha broke into laughter once more. "I'm sorry for causing confusion. I would have shared my story, but you never asked." What would you have told me?" David was intrigued. "I'm all ears now." Samantha gave a gentle smile, moved towards the table, and took a seat. David trailed behind her and settled in the adjacent seat. Following a brief pause, Samantha began to speak. "Mr. Adams, thank you for employing me. I truly appreciate your kindness." However, David was aware that his act of hiring her wasn't purely out of kindness. At that time, he had been desperately in need of a gas station attendant. "So what's your backstory, Samantha? I'm struggling to grasp how you transformed from the woman I first met to this stunning figure within just a month." Samantha offered a smile and queried, "Does the name George Harrison ring a bell for you?" David furrowed his brow in thought before responding. "George Harrison, the billionaire owner of the Harrison Inn chain? Yes, I've heard of him. What does he have to do with this?" "Well, I'm actually his daughter," Samantha replied. David was momentarily stunned by the disclosure. "What? You're George Harrison's daughter? The tycoon's child?" "Indeed I am," Samantha affirmed with a smile. "You see, about a year ago, my father and I had a disastrous argument. The details are long-winded, and the cause rather foolish. I was a wild child, uninterested in becoming the person my father envisioned me to be. I simply took too many things for granted back then. Ultimately, I lashed out at my father, asserting that I could manage just fine without his support or his money. However, I was excessively emotional at the time and didn't anticipate my father would take my words to heart. He was outraged by my defiance and promptly cut off all financial support. Within days, I was penniless. The friends who had previously shown me kindness vanished the moment they realized I was broke. The initial months was unbearable. I felt like a recovering addict undergoing withdrawal symptoms. All my usual recreational activities were suddenly out of reach. My father allowed me a month to secure employment and find my own accommodation. He was unyielding in his decision. As Samantha shared her story, David sat back, astonished by the dramatic turn of events. The celebratory atmosphere of the party faded into the background as he listened to her tale with rapt attention, his eyes wide with anticipation for the next chapter. So that's how I found myself leaving my parents' lavish home, completely clueless about my next move. I had attended one of the most prestigious private schools, but my academic performance was just satisfactory, merely to keep my father content. My first job hunt led me to a fast food outlet where they hired me as a janitor. It was then that I realized how difficult it can sometimes be to land even a simple job. It became clear to me that I had been viewing the world through rose-colored glasses, and how people could sometimes be harsh to each other for no valid reason. Samantha had previously lived a life of constant revelry, but when faced with the realities of life, she discovered that people perceived her as arrogant and unpleasant. Referencing her privileged background only seemed to worsen her image, despite the fact that she was just an ordinary girl, kind-hearted and pleasant to those around her. Throughout her job search, Samantha made another observation about people. She noticed that there were kind-hearted individuals who treated homeless people with dignity and compassion. She realized that sometimes seeking help as a homeless person could yield quicker results than as a regular person. At times, it worked as people would hastily hand her a coin, eager to dismiss her as quickly as possible. After earning her first wages at the fast food restaurant, Samantha realized that her upbringing in her affluent father's household had indeed been beneficial. She hadn't realized the wealth of knowledge she had gained about customer service and the art of attracting repeat business from observing her father. By the time she started working at the gas station, a year had passed since she had moved out of her parents' house. Samantha had set herself a challenge to start her own hotel and restaurant business to prove to her father that she had evolved, and this was the exact reason she sought employment at David's gas station. Samantha explained that initially she aimed to understand the customer flow in the area. She confessed to David that it would have been difficult to approach someone of his stature directly with a business proposition. She wanted to contribute something to his business first before making her request. David, after a thoughtful pause, finally broke the silence. "Wow, you certainly have piqued my interest now. So, what's your proposal?" Samantha's response was straightforward. "It's actually quite simple. The gas station is strategically located by a busy highway, at a spot where many travelers tend to pause and rest. I propose that we open a small hotel and a restaurant here." Upon hearing Samantha's proposal, David scrutinized her. Samantha realized she had neglected to apologize for her initial misleading appearance. "By the way, I apologize for the impression I gave you when we first met. If you are open to my proposal, I believe we can swiftly expand your business," Samantha admitted sincerely. David was taken aback. "All right. Well, that's quite a remarkable revelation about you," he acknowledged, shaking his head. "Thank you, Mr. Adams," she replied. David was still puzzled about something else. "One more question, Samantha. How did you manage to befriend Margaret? She's known to be a tough person to get along with." "Well," Samantha began, "I observed that everyone assumed Margaret was perpetually upset and impossible to communicate with. That perception became her reputation. People stopped trying to converse with her. I simply interacted with her, listened to her. She turned out to be an intriguing person. We chat often. And guess what? She's even dating someone now." Throughout the evening, David found himself instinctively gravitating towards Samantha, as though wishing to shield her from the others. He couldn't quite comprehend why he felt such a strong need to protect her. He had told her they'd have plenty of time to discuss business matters later. For now, they were just there to enjoy the party. As the night wore on, he noticed himself stealing glances at her more frequently, and he began to realize it was getting harder to distance himself from her. The sun was just beginning to cast a golden glow over the horizon as David, the usually late riser, hopped into his car. His destination was clear, the gas station. The previous night's events were still fresh in his mind. Samantha's reveal and her subsequent proposal had stirred something in him. It wasn't just the surprise that she was George Harrison's daughter or the startling transformation she had made. It was her resourcefulness, determination, and resilience that had left him deeply impressed. As he drove, he saw the city slowly come to life. His usual routine consisted of meetings, phone calls, and lots of paperwork. This morning was different. He had one primary focus: Samantha. As he approached the gas station, he spotted Samantha at her usual spot. Despite the early hour, she was already hard at work, a testament to her commitment. Her professional demeanor had barely changed from the radiant, glamorous woman who had held court at the party just hours before. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on him, it only reinforced his admiration for her. As David sat in his car, watching Samantha attentively serve the customers, he felt a sense of certainty seeping in. He pictured her in an immaculate dress and in a leadership role, steering the course of their shared enterprise. His decision was made. Samantha had proven she was not only capable of overcoming her personal obstacles, but she could also significantly contribute to his business, offering fresh perspectives and innovative ideas. Working alongside Samantha proved to be a rewarding experience for David. Her motivations extended far beyond financial gain, something that was a refreshing departure from what David was accustomed to in the world of business. Having been exposed to immense wealth from a young age, Samantha had a perspective that was different from the norm. Monetary success wasn't her endgame. Instead, she was passionately focused on creating and sustaining a thriving hotel and restaurant business. She brought to the table an infectious enthusiasm and a commitment that was unwavering. Every decision she made, every idea she suggested, was driven by a genuine desire to create an establishment that would be known for its quality and excellent customer service. Mr. Harrison, Samantha's father, was a clever man. He might have appeared to let his daughter wander off on her own, but he always had his eyes on her. He knew where she was and what she was doing at all times, but he chose to keep his distance. Throughout the year, he observed his daughter's struggles and successes from afar, feeling an overwhelming urge many times to abandon his resolve and rush to her side, to offer comfort and support. But he saw that she was battling her own demons and enduring some truly challenging times, and he believed that intervening would rob her of the lessons she needed to learn. In a way, he applied his business acumen to his personal situation, understanding the value of patience and letting things unfold naturally. When he learned about Samantha's ambitious plans to partner with David and launch a hotel and restaurant, relief washed over him. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. His little girl was growing up, learning life's hard lessons, and was now on her way to becoming a successful entrepreneur. Samantha's transformation from a reckless party girl to a determined businesswoman filled him with immense pride and satisfaction. The struggle had been worth it. His daughter had finally found her path. David found himself grappling with emotions that extended far beyond the boundaries of a professional relationship. Unbeknownst to Samantha, he was nurturing a growing affection for her, a secret love that stirred within him. Unsure of how to express his feelings, he channeled them into ensuring her well-being and protection. His attentiveness often bordered on excessive, catching Samantha by surprise on more than one occasion. Samantha, for her part, tried to maintain an impression of neutrality, of someone who was unaffected by any underlying romantic currents. But she couldn't ignore the signals. David's consistent attention and care suggested he was far from indifferent towards her. It stirred feelings of uncertainty within her, modeling the clear boundaries of their professional relationship with subtle shades of personal affection. Within just 6 months, the petite hotel and charming restaurant were fully constructed and ready for their grand unveiling. The date for the grand opening was set, anticipation palpable in the air. One evening, a handful of days prior to the big event, David and Samantha found themselves sharing a moment of quiet in the new restaurant. enjoying cups of coffee from the newly installed machine. "Better than many cafes out there," David remarked. The high-end Italian coffee machines were a personal choice of Samantha's. Their conversation flowed seamlessly from one topic to another, a fluid exchange of ideas about upcoming tasks and general operational processes. However, Samantha seemed a tad restless, as if she was struggling to voice something. When David's train of thought finally ran out of steam, Samantha met his gaze with an intense, serious look. "Is something wrong?" David asked, puzzled by her demeanor. "You're terrible at concealing your feelings," she stated bluntly. "Pardon?" Samantha sighed heavily, rolling her eyes. Then she reached across his table, lightly touching David's hand. He jolted slightly, taken aback by her action. Samantha's smile reassured him as she finally blurted out, "Aren't you going to ask me out already?" That evening marked a new chapter in Samantha and David's relationship, propelling it from professional partnership to a romantic liaison. David found the shift quite challenging initially, struggling to reconcile the image of his business partner with that of his girlfriend. Whenever she spoke, he would find himself lost in her words, simply staring at her in a daze, struggling to stay focused. Throughout this transition, Samantha retained a professional demeanor during working hours, only letting her softer side show outside of work. 2 days before the grand opening, Samantha decided to extend an invitation to her parents. Mr. Harrison, watching his daughter alight from a modest Toyota sedan parked in front of their family home, felt an assurance wash over him. His beloved daughter had indeed changed. Despite being able to afford a more luxurious vehicle, she opted for a middle-range sedan. "Mom? Dad?" Samantha walked into the house, a welcoming smile adorning her face. Mr. Harrison, who was in the living room immersed in his newspaper, looked up to see his daughter. "Hey, Dad. It's been a while. How have you been?" Mr. Harrison got up, his face breaking into a warm smile. He moved towards Samantha, pulling her into a heartfelt embrace. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry, baby girl." Samantha looked up at her father, her eyes welling up with tears. A realization dawned on her. Her father had been aware of her struggles and whereabouts all along. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for teaching me the most valuable lesson of my life." She then turned her gaze towards David, a radiant smile gracing her lips. "I presume you already know your future son-in-law." Mr. Harrison turned towards David, a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. "Well, I've done my part. Now it's your turn to either cry or celebrate with her. I'm just going to sit back, relax, and await the arrival of my grandkids." The grand opening was a tremendous success. It exuded an atmosphere akin to a pre-wedding celebration. The hotel and restaurant operations ran smoothly. While there wasn't an immediate surge of customers, this didn't worry Samantha or David. Samantha, consumed by her work and passion for the project, cherished each customer interaction. During the first few weeks, she personally greeted customers in the hotel lobby, offering them a brief tour and ensuring they felt welcomed and appreciated. At times, David would gaze at Samantha, completely awestruck. He found himself questioning why he had been so blessed in life. Why had he been given this radiant, extraordinary woman to stand by his side? He couldn't quite discern the answer, but perhaps it was because, despite enduring many trials, including the pain of never having known his parents, he had always maintained an attitude of gratitude for everything he had. A year later, Samantha and David exchanged their vows. They chose to have an intimate wedding, inviting only their closest friends and family. Among the guests was the radiant Mrs. Nelson. She looked completely transformed, having shed significant weight and gaining an air of confidence that was hard to miss. She continued her role as the manager at the gas station, a job she journeyed to every day, accompanied by her boyfriend, a close friend of Mr. George Harrison. During the wedding, she was dressed in an elegant gown that perfectly complemented her newfound poise. Her transformation was a source of joy for everyone who knew her, and seeing her glowing at the wedding, it was clear she too had found happiness amidst all the changes. Mrs. Nelson approached David and said, "Congratulations! I'm so thrilled for both of you. You both truly deserve all this happiness." She was about to walk away but paused, turning back to look at David. Her usually jovial expression shifted momentarily to a kind of melancholy. "Thank you, David," she murmured, her words heavy with sincerity. Then the smile returned, lighting up her face once more. David watched her walk away, a knowing look in his eyes. He didn't need to question the meaning behind her words. He knew exactly what she was thanking him for. David, an orphan, had grown up craving the warmth of family and the bond of blood. Samantha's parents, with their generous hearts and open arms, filled this void in David's life. They welcomed him as their own, not merely as their daughter's partner, but as their son. Their love for him was unconditional, and it shone through every interaction, every shared meal, every shared moment. The story of Samantha and David was more than just a love story. It was a tale of resilience, of learning and growing through life's trials and tribulations. It was about a woman who refused to let her privileged background define her, and a man who found love and family in the most unexpected